Well, thank you, everybody. This feels like a whole production. It's almost like if there was a stage, it would be a whole thing, right? How many of you guys caught the threat brief that I did earlier? Just a couple. Bear with me for just a couple of slides. It's going to be a little bit redundant. There may even be the same jokes. I don't know. We'll see. So what this session is really about, you guys can hear me okay if I'm right here? Okay. What we have seen over the last few years is a blurring of the lines between cybersecurity threats and kinetic threats or physical threats, right? And I was in a unique position to observe this. So I'll put up the bio slide. I'll talk a little bit more in detail than I did this morning. So I've been with CrowdStrike for about a year now. Prior to that, I was the Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Oklahoma, and I actually stepped into that role right before, it was July of 2019. So I had enough time to realize I had no idea what I was doing, and tell leadership I had no idea and I had no tools before the pandemic hit, which actually turned out to be a really good strategy, because they were freaked out. And so when all of the federal money became available, we basically ripped and replaced the entire cybersecurity stack for Oklahoma Cyber Command. And it got to go best of breed all the way through, which was great. But my background is actually in intelligence. And so I went through kind of the normal iterations of, I'm going to patch everything, and I'm going to make sure that vulnerability management is core to everything we do. And then I realized that I didn't have enough people for that. And you know, when you have an environment that's like at any given time around 120,000 endpoints, and I don't know, at the time I think we had 2,400 different applications we were supporting. The complexity is crazy. And turns out people care about change management. They don't want you to patch stuff and break the life safety systems, that sort of thing. So we kind of backed up a little bit and said, when we take a page out of my old book here, maybe it's more important for us to focus on the intelligence side of things and really put resources where they can have the most impact, because I can't put them everywhere. And so that kind of led us down the path of building an intelligence unit within Oklahoma Cyber Command, looking for subscriptions that would be valuable for cyber threat intelligence, and really building relationships across the different organizations within Oklahoma. That's kind of the background of the state experience. I think you guys probably heard I'm also a professor of cybersecurity at the University of Oklahoma. I actually spent 15 years as an IT guy at the University of Oklahoma. So I've got a lot of higher ed experience as well, which was really good because what are we good at in higher ed? Building consensus, right? People say we're slow. Actually, my former boss when I was with the University of Oklahoma used to say, higher ed is the only place where a 12-to-1 vote is a tie, right? And you guys know this. But those gave me the skills to actually go out and build the relationships I needed to take an intelligence-first approach to cybersecurity. What I'm going to walk you guys through at a very high level is the art of intelligence, because it is an art. There's a little science to it too, but mostly it's an art. We'll talk specifically about cyber threat intelligence. And I'll show you kind of what we did in Oklahoma when it came to CTI. But then there were some interesting things that happened during the pandemic that I'm going to point out to you, some shifts in how things evolve. We'll talk a lot about nation states. Turns out it's kind of a thing. And then I'm going to get into some public sector specific threats. So this is probably one of my favorite quotes of all time. It's not the favorite quote, because my favorite quote is actually Mike Tyson. Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth, right? Love that, apply it all the time. The Rumsfeldian dilemma is what this is. And basically, he was testifying to Congress and trying to explain intelligence to them, and basically said, hey, we know stuff. We know there are things that we don't know, and there are things that we don't know, which, unless you've really experienced that, it sounds like you're just talking in circles, right? It's really not, though. So when you get into it, and these are just some use cases, and I'm not going to go through all of these. Again, you guys have access to the deck, so feel free to comb through these in detail and holler at me later if you have questions about it. But when you look at things, through that lens, cybersecurity is probably the thing we should focus on here, right? That's kind of what this event is. So we know that Microsoft has critical vulnerabilities that could allow a compromise of Active Directory. So that's a known, right? The known unknown is we know other nations will try to use this to influence elections. You can substitute whatever event you want in here. They just like messing with us anymore. But we don't know exactly how they're going to do it. So that's a known unknown. The unknown unknown would be groups that we're not even really aware of. We know that there's fraudsters that are probably going to take advantage of this vulnerability, but we don't know what they're going to target. We don't know what their TTPs are, and it's important that we know that there are unknown. Now I really feel like I'm talking in circles. We know that you guys watch Friends? Anybody? But they don't know that we know that they know that we know, right? The whole Joey thing. Sorry. Okay, so what is threat intelligence? Basically, it's anything that allows you to better position yourself to respond to a situation, right? And really, everything that we do in intelligence is about making better decisions. From a policy standpoint, you're looking for how can I use data to better inform services we're providing to constituents. From a cybersecurity standpoint, it's, hey, where can I put the limited resources that I have so that they'll have the biggest impact? So there's really two types of intelligence, things that you're producing, either because you discovered it, you experienced it, or you actually went through a full development process. And then there's the outsourced model, all the external threat intelligence that you can get. And there are tons of them out there, right? A lot of them are free. And by the way, you should take advantage of the free ones. They may not all have the same quality of intelligence, but I've always been of the school of thought that more is better. And you may want to have someone that actually curates the intelligence before you start using it, right? But these can take the forms of proprietary subscription fees. There are companies that actually do this for a living. I work for one of them now, right? There are folks that actually take time to evaluate what's going on in the environment, build out the TTPs so that they can share indicators of attack or indicators of compromise with organizations so they can better position themselves. And there's actually quite a few that are very industry specific. And typically they take the form of like an ISAC, right? So higher education has the REN ISAC, state and local government has the multi-state ISAC, information sharing and analysis centers. FinTech, oil and gas, right? They all have different players that are attacking them, looking for how to exploit their environments. Seems silly to have this in my deck at this conference, but cyber is kind of important, right? Especially when you start talking about the nexus of the physical and virtual worlds. I saw this a lot while I was in the seat. More and more doxing. Internet of Things are a definite area where you're starting to see, hey, if this system gets exploited, that's going to have real ramifications in the physical world, right? I mean, there's the story of the fish tank in the casino that got compromised, right? You guys have heard this. Your Nest thermostats, your Ring doorbells, all of these things are entry points that you need to be thinking about. And CTI is a way to do that. And then security and safety systems. We didn't really get into this in the threat brief earlier, but this is like rubber meets the road, cyber meets physical, specifically in education. And really, if you want to get really specific, K through 12, right? We've seen the adversary actually focusing attacks on surveillance systems, on building access management systems, and I still have probably PTSD or some condition that I have from sitting in the seat for so long, but you immediately go to the absolute worst case scenario, right? So you have a cyber breach that takes down the surveillance system, building management systems offline, and you have an active shooter. Worst case scenario, what can you do at that point? Boots on the ground, that's it, right? So cyber, kind of a big deal. We should probably be paying attention to it. You guys are probably familiar with these headlines, but we're already starting to see, just over the last few years, national headline making events that impact the economy, think the Colonial Pipeline breach, that impact public safety. If you guys are familiar with the Florida water supply attack that was done in 2021, I think. And then, did you guys know that there's actually been deaths attributed to cyber attacks? So the first one was in Germany in 2020. A lady was needing a medical care at a facility. That facility was ransomed, and they had to transport her to another facility, and she died en route. And so that was attributed directly back. There's been numerous cases since then, especially as the healthcare industry gets more and more targeted. But again, cyber is important because it's actually tangible now. So how are organizations using cyber threat intelligence? This is just a Gartner study that they did a while back. But basically, I look at this as kind of a maturation model. So CTI, when you're first getting started, you're really just using it to detect threats, right? As you get more mature, then you can actually start doing things to do more prevention-oriented work. More mature, it actually starts influencing how you respond to attacks. You've got an incident, hey, I know who the adversary is, I know what their TTPs are, we need to look here first, right? And then threat mitigation, obviously that's, as a CISO, that's where you want to be, right? I want to be in a situation where that threat's been mitigated before it even happens. But I want to spend a little bit of time on other, because you probably have already heard all this other stuff, right? Other is interesting for me because we had to, again, this is during the pandemic, we had to figure out how to make this work. And so other in Oklahoma became public health and public safety. So what was going on in 2020? We were trying to get everybody tested in our State Department of Health, and we were trying to get vaccines out. And so it turns out Oklahoma Cyber Command was charged with the cybersecurity for both of those things. And so we were immediately using the CTI that we were either developing or subscribed to inform the protections we were putting in place around the supply chain for the vaccine and around our really security education and awareness for the general population. Election security, I'm probably going to spend a little bit more time on this, but this became, when I stepped into the role, my first meeting was with the Secretary of the Election Board. And I told him, you're my #1 customer. Everything else can go by the wayside. My job is to secure democracy. And he absolutely ate that up. And so we brought Cyber Command alongside of every single election that we did while I was in that seat. We had a team in the operations center really for a couple of weeks prior to the election and even a week after as they're certifying the results. And primarily what they were doing, you know, you're saying, Matt, it's too late to do anything if it's actually during the election. Yeah, I know. We were doing stuff beforehand too. But during the election, we would actually have a team that was scraping social media and looking for misinformation and disinformation that was being posted out there. During the 2020 election, we actually found a post on Twitter that said, hey, you guys in Oklahoma, we're expecting such a tremendous turnout for the election that Republicans are going to vote on Tuesday and Democrats are going to vote on Wednesday. Yeah, everyone's chuckling because you've had civics, right? That was a real thing. And so we actually had our team go through, find where that was posted, send it over to the Secretary of the State Election Board, and had him debunk it. That's great, right? Do that over and over again for about a month. You're finding stuff that's just wrong, or hey, this precinct moved over here, or whatever. Trying to make sure that the constituents know where they need to go to actually cast their votes. That scenario worked okay in 2020. It's not going to work in 2024. With generative AI, and specifically the deep fakes that are available now, it won't just be a tweet that's out there that says, Democrats, you vote on Wednesday. It'll be a video of the Secretary of the State Election Board saying that. These are the things that we need to be concerned about right now. So like I said, I'm going to get into elections just a little bit more here in a little bit. But one of the other things that they handed me in the middle of the pandemic, so this was in April, and I'm sitting, like many of you, I was officing at the dining room table. And as a CISO, I was working 18, 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, trying to figure out how to get everything back the way it should be. And my boss calls me on a Friday afternoon and says, Matt, you're now responsible for enterprise fraud detection, prevention, and investigation. Man, you know I don't have a fraud background, right? Yeah, that's a security thing. So again, I go back to what I've done in the past, right? So we just finished building out a SIM for the state of Oklahoma, which is basically a huge database, right? And so I had the state Unemployment Security Commission send me all of their data, and I dumped it into our SIM, which is a horrible idea. It's very expensive to do it that way. Again, we had more money than we knew to do with at the time, so it was okay, but don't do it that way. But we started going through and looking for common things, which we ultimately wound up calling indicators of fraud, IOFs, because we're IT guys and we have to have acronyms. So indicators of fraud. In the span of that weekend, we found $17 million in fraudulent claims. It's a 48-hour period. You guys have heard the saying, the reward for good work is more work. Yeah, it's true. So unemployment insurance, we became responsible for identifying those things and actually sending it over to the Securities Commission fraud department for them to actually do the investigations and that sort of thing. But then they said, hey, we got all these other eligibility programs in state government. What can you do around TANF? What can you do around WIC, SNAP, taxes? I tell you all this because what I've found is it's the same methodology, whether you're talking about cyber criminals or e-criminals, fraudsters. You can apply the same methodology to identify these folks, and it all comes essentially from CTI. We also got so good at this that we decided we didn't want to be consumers anymore of threat intelligence. We wanted to be producers. So I mentioned we built an intelligence unit in the state of Oklahoma. We got to the point where every incident that we had that I actually had a person investigate, they published a report. It was turned into an intelligence product that we then turned around and sent to all the members in the Oklahoma Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which we launched in December of 2020. It was free, completely based on geography. So we actually had private sector folks that participated, public sector, K through 12, higher education. And when the surrounding states found out about it, they wanted in. And so even though it was geography based, we wound up working with Colorado, Arkansas, and Texas on what we ultimately wound up calling Taco Tuesdays. So Taco was Texas, Arkansas, Colorado, Oklahoma. And every Tuesday, one of us would brief out the other three on things that we'd found in the last 30 days. Great way to share intelligence across the board. Then we got into, hey, we have elections coming up. I want to see how the public's responding to our policy decisions that we're making, and so enter sentiment tracking. Again, it's all the same kind of thing. You're looking at patterns, trying to identify indicators, and then setting alerts on those things. I won't spend a lot of time on counterintelligence, counterterrorism, just because it's not really stuff that publicly consumable. But again, if you heard the threat brief this morning, we are dealing with terrorists, we are dealing with hacktivists, and these two tool sets really come in handy when you're dealing with those types of individuals and groups. And CTI is the basis of all of it. So I promised you a few things, and I'm quickly running out of time. I promised you a few things around the dynamic shift that I saw during the pandemic. And so this is Oklahoma-specific stuff. What we were seeing prior to 2020 was basically the real world would impact what happened in the cyber world. In Oklahoma, we're unfortunately known for police brutality. We used to be. I think we're a little bit better now. But it actually got to the point where anytime there was some sort of overuse of force or a police shooting, that there was immediately followed upon by some sort of a cyber event against that municipality. It was so bad that we actually published a playbook that we distributed to the local law enforcement that said, hey, if this happens, you know how the PIO is going to respond, right? You already have that plan. Here's your cyber response. Get it to your IT guys. They need to know this because as soon as your PIO is done talking, your website's going down, right? So you can kind of see a couple of things there. I'll call out the hoodie ban just because it's a fun bill. In 2015, we had a senator that was trying to make a name for himself and decided that he would run a bill that made it a felony to commit a felony with your face covered. One of those tack-on things, right? Well, you guys have heard of Anonymous, right? Everybody's Anonymous? Big hacktivist group. They do other stuff too, but it's probably what they're most known for. Their whole thing is the Guy Fawkes mask, right? So they're doing stuff that, they probably shouldn't be doing anyway, but now they're going to have this felony on top of that because they got their face covered. They took issue and decided they were going to take the state of Oklahoma down. And so we caught the chatter in the dark web and were able to put some controls in place to mitigate the attack that we knew was coming. They still took us down for like 3 minutes before our ISPs could actually route it to the Bitbucket. And you say, Matt, 3 minutes, I don't know why you're complaining about that. That's fantastic. Except that we provide life safety services. And that's 3 minutes where people couldn't get admitted, people couldn't get medicine. We had caseworkers that were out in the field that couldn't get to files. That's a big deal. So fast forward to 2020, and things flipped. Part of it was because everyone was locked up, locked down, is that the right? Yeah. During the lockdown, everybody was at home, so there wasn't a whole lot of things happening in the real world that were informing cyber attacks. But what we started seeing was a whole lot of coordination happening on social media platforms that allowed for huge protests and counter protests. And you can kind of see again, this is Oklahoma specific, but these were actual tweets that we were monitoring and working with our local law enforcement partners to ensure that they were adequately staffed for these events, and so that they would go off without incident. Nation-state influence. You guys know that the nation-state actors are kind of playing in social media now, right? So this was probably the biggest first biggest, I'm screwing up my words. It's late in the day. I'm still in Central Time. The biggest first incident where we know that Russia was behind it, right? So this happened in 2016 at an Islamic center in Houston, where basically you had a group called the Heart of Texas. They set up a protest, and they were wearing Confederate flags. They were wearing T-shirts that said "White Lives Matter," pretty far right. And then you had a group called United Muslims of America that staged a counter protest at the same time, and they were talking about, let's save our knowledge. Let's they're preaching against hate. Very different ends of the spectrum. They came together, they had the event, there were some scuffles, but what no one really knew was that both of these Facebook groups were created by the Kremlin, by a group in St. Petersburg called the Internet Research Agency that had hundreds of people working around the clock, posting, liking, retweeting, to try and build out a realistic group in both of these areas. And they were really good at it. I don't know if you guys see it. Look at how many people like both of those groups. And this is in 2016, right? So at least 250,000 people joined those groups prior to the event. Their whole reason for doing this was to stoke division in the United States. They're still doing this, guys. I don't know, if you guys probably spend some time out on social media. I do it just for, one, I gauge the intelligence or the effectiveness of public education based off what I read out there. At least in Oklahoma, it's not great. But I think you probably keyed in on the divisiveness that has happened in social media. And a lot of it has been stoked by our adversaries building out these fake groups in deliberately antagonizing each other. We know that the psychological operation, this is what we typically refer to it as, PSYOPs, psychological operations, propaganda. We know that they've been actually escalating this. And kind of the scary thing about this is there's no cost for them to do this, right? They're using technology that we built in the United States to sow division in the United States. It's kind of brilliant. Specific public sector threats, and this is where I'm really focusing a lot of my time these days is looking at this and understanding, because I'm still passionate about defending democracy, right? I still volunteer with the state election board. These people are scared, folks. If you look and see what's out here, and I should apologize, I should have done a disclaimer up front. There may be some disturbing things in here. I tried to sanitize it before I put it out here, but there may be a couple of statements in here that you might take issue with. I apologize. But these are screenshots that we pulled off of social media platforms. But you can see election workers are scared. Social media is being used to propagate threats against elected officials. You see the quote down there, if you can't vote them out, shoot them out. This is making elected officials question whether they want to continue to serve, but also there's concern for their families as well, right? Pile on doxing on top of that, where they publish your personal information, or swatting. We actually had a swatting. So swatting, so I got a puzzled look in the back. So swatting is basically where there's a fake 911 call that comes in and says, I've got an active shooter at this location, and basically law enforcement will descend. And we had that happen at the University of Oklahoma last summer. 40 different law enforcement agencies actually deployed and locked down the entire campus for 12 hours. It's incredibly dangerous, and it's actually started where they were publishing the home addresses of law enforcement officers so that the tactical teams would actually break into the home of someone who had a firearm. It's a recipe for disaster. So threats against public officials, you can see they're using it to propagate conspiracy theories. The headline there about the man that broke into the FBI office, he was killed. He firmly believed what he'd read online and was trying to make a difference. And then we're actually getting some voter intimidation stuff going on now too, where you see the picture of the couple there. This is in Arizona, where there are actively soliciting people to come out and be armed and stand next to voting precincts, ballot drop boxes, that sort of thing, to ensure that there's no fraud going on. What that's going to do is actually people are going to be not interested in voting, which is not what any of us want, right? So those are things that are happening right now, specific to public sector. I always get asked, hey, this is great information. How do I get started in this? Is there anything that we can do individually? Is there anything that we can do as organizations? If you're in a cybersecurity team right now, I would tell you, go out, hire people that have intelligence backgrounds, or train the people that you currently have so that they understand how to do intelligence collection, how to do analysis, exploitation, production, and ensure that you've built in some sort of a consumption and feedback mechanism in the backside of that. I poached constantly from law enforcement, from the National Guard. Actually, it wasn't really poaching with the National Guard because they need a day job, right? Got some tremendous resources for folks that were looking for cybersecurity experience but already had intelligence training from the National Guard. They disappeared for a couple of weeks during the summer, a week and a month. That was fine. What I got out of that was so much more than what I lost when they were on military leave. And then really anybody that has a competitive intelligence background, they can help you. So most companies, not most companies, a lot of companies are starting to build out competitive intelligence capabilities. So you're going to start seeing there are people that have this skill set coming in from the private sector even. I've talked about ISACs a lot today. If you're not currently participating in an information sharing and analysis center, you got to. You got to. And I would challenge you, don't just be a consumer, be a producer. Share that information that you create back with the group so that everybody gets better. Again, you've heard me talk about cybersecurity as a team sport here. Relationships, relationships, relationships. I actually spent time convincing the Fusion Center in Oklahoma that I was part of their team. It was really important to me that we had that conduit between our groups, and it actually allowed them to have access to tools that they wouldn't ordinarily have access to, because some companies won't sell their tools to law enforcement. State agency over here, we do cyber stuff. But it allowed us to really get better intelligence to the Fusion Center, which then they could turn around and disperse out to local law enforcement. Law enforcement's another important one. Your state bureaus of investigation, your state departments of public safety, these are your buddies. And you need to make sure that they see you as a valuable asset of their team so that you can help them prepare for physical events. And in the event something goes sideways, you can continue to feed them intelligence that's valuable during the operation. Federal partners, they know the stuff, guys. They have access to intelligence. You build that relationship, they will share it with you, and vice versa. You can get way more information there. Subscribe to the intelligence feeds. It is worth it to pay for intelligence. I know not all organizations have that luxury, but if you've got these other intelligence feeds coming in through the other relationships that you have, having something that you pay for in addition gives you a nice reconciliation point. So you can say, yep, I've got corroboration on this information. This is valuable. I'm going to push it out to the rest of my community. And I already mentioned, don't just be a consumer, be a producer. Contribute back into the cybersecurity community. And that has me right at time, guys. So I appreciate your attention. I'll hang back for any questions you guys might have. If you want to geek out a little bit, I'm up for that. But otherwise, hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.